Well, with back to school just around the corner, students and their parents are slowly gearing up to get back into the routine again. For some young people, there's undoubtedly a certain amount of dread associated with this time of year, and their parents may or may not even be aware of it. That's because it seems sometimes the parents are the actual source of that dread. Talk to any parent and they'll tell you they want nothing but the best for their kids. Sometimes, though, that's reflected in some pretty high expectations they set for their children. Is that backfiring? Joining us tonight with his thoughts on the matter, we are pleased to welcome clinical psychologist Dr. Simon Sherry. Thanks so much for coming in tonight, Doctor.
Happy to be here.
So we hear about, these so-called helicopter parents, that kind of thing all the time. How common a problem is this?
This parenting style is quite common, wherein you've got a parent who's helicoptering or snow plowing and engaging in overprotective behaviors. And what our research is suggesting is that parenting style is very much conducive to raising a child who's perfectionistic. And when that perfectionistic personality starts to take root, it can be very problematic both for the child's ability to achieve and for the child's mental health.
We'll get into the nuts and bolts of that in just a second, but we should point out that those expectations come from a good place, don't they, for a lot of these parents? Like, parents really do want their kids to do well in life, and presumably that's why they're behaving this way.
There's nothing wrong with having high expectations for your child. In fact, in many ways, as a parent, it's good to be demanding. But you want to pair that demandingness with warmth, care, kindness, and nurturance. What we see with parents who tend to rear perfectionists is they tend to be critical, controlling, demanding, and very micromanaging of what their child thinks, feels, and does.
So when you have a perfectionistic child, how does that manifest itself? What kind of kid is a perfectionistic child?
They often have a compulsive need to be perfect, striving for perfect in most of what they do. They can be intensely self-critical, and they often report or feel a real tangible pressure to be perfect from other people. They can also be very doubtful of their own actions, checking and rechecking in an effort to ensure that what they do is perfect.
It sounds like a very unhappy existence.
In many ways, yes. Perfectionism is linked to a host of academic difficulties, including procrastination, public speaking anxiety, fear of failure. And unfortunately, perfectionism has a very dark side with links to eating disorders, depression, anxiety, and even suicide behaviors.
Wow. So how does this manifest itself from the parents? Are they generally trying to kind of guilt their kids to do better, or are they doling out punishment, when Junior brings home a C instead of an A, or how is that showing up generally?
We have a generation of parents who are placing a lot of emphasis on performance, rank, status, achievement. They're pressuring their kids to go for perfect. And they're teaching them that competition is more important than cooperation. And they're giving these kids a dog-eat-dog mentality as they head out into the world.
And we should point out we're not just talking about academics here, right? There are some parents who are pressuring their kids to do well in sports. They want their son to be the next NHL star.
Absolutely. Oftentimes there's one or two key areas of focus. Sometimes that's academia, it may be athletics. Oftentimes it's also appearance.
These lofty expectations aren't necessarily really benefiting students, are they?
In many ways, they're backfiring. The expectations can be so high and the pressure can be so intense, a child will end up paralyzed or overly focused on minor setbacks.
And you see a lot of these kids, I guess, in your private practice.
Absolutely. As a clinical psychologist, I'll often see young people oftentimes entering into university who are struggling enormously with perceived or actual pressures to be perfect.
And what do you tell them? How do you counsel them to get along better and deal with some of this?
First of all, I think it's very important that if you struggle with perfectionism, that you come forward and seek help. Oftentimes perfectionists are very reluctant to seek help because to do so is to admit that you are in some ways imperfect. And when someone arrives in therapy, it's often important to help them diversify. When it comes to academics, for example, they often put all their eggs in one basket where their self-esteem is overly reliant on grades. And they often have a sort of misshapen life wherein there's a hyper-focus on achievement to the exclusion of other more diverse pursuits like having a social life or a hobby.
I meant to mention this earlier. Is there a certain age range where this is more problematic? Like, I presume you see patients of all ages, but maybe tougher on a teenager than it is on an 8-year-old, or is that not?
That's a great question, and it's a question where we recently generated an empirical answer. We conducted one of the largest studies ever on perfectionism involving more than 25,000 participants, and we found that young people have never been more perfectionistic than today. In particular, young adults in the 18 to 25 year age range seem to be especially perfectionistic compared to earlier generations.
And why is that? What's going on?
Certainly the parenting practices we've been discussing here today are part of that, where you've got critical, demanding, helicoptering, overprotective parents. Beyond that, I think we need to look to the rise of something like social media, where people are constantly bombarded by images that are lofty, unrealistic, and perfectionistic. And social media provides parents and children alike with too many yardsticks that they're using to measure themselves. In this social media era, it's never been harder to keep up with the Joneses.
Right. How's
How's my kid doing in terms of their rank? How are they doing in hockey? How are they doing in school? We're bombarded by unrealistic expectations.
Fascinating. Presumably there is a better way. So how should parents be handling this, short of just walking away and letting the kid do whatever the kid wants to do?
Absolutely, there is a better way. I think parents should focus less on outcomes. Did you get 98% on that test? And more on process. Did you prepare well? Were you disciplined? Did you work hard? Were you organized? Beyond that, I think it's very important that parents not love their children in a performance contingent way.
Right.
For these parents who raise perfectionists, the child is only as good as their last test, only as good as their last performance on the sports field.
Right.
And so moving towards a parenting style where you love and support your child in an unconditional way is very important to this.
You've given folks a whole lot to think about. I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight, Doctor.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. Dr. Simon Sherry is a clinical psychologist based in Halifax, joining us tonight to talk about setting realistic and healthy goals for students, something that should be on the minds of a lot of people with back to school just around the corner. Stay with us. We'll be right back.